Yes, our God is a mountain mover, and you know what? He's still moving mountains every day. And the good news is He can move your mountains too. Hi there, this is Chuck Cooper, host of It's a God Thing radio program. Thank you for joining us today. We sure are glad you're here. You're about to listen to some awesome interviews with believers in Jesus Christ who will tell you how God has revealed and proved Himself to them by moving mountains they were unable to move by themselves. They say that their stories can only be described as a God thing. Ready for a real blessing? Alrighty then, let's do this God thing.
Well, welcome to our show today. I'm sitting here in beautiful home in Smyrna, Tennessee, and I'm holding a book in my hand. And I want to read you what it says on the back cover, and then we'll talk about it. The voice spoke to me as clearly as anyone ever had in my life. It was the second time in several minutes that I had heard those same words as I sat frozen, unable to move from my place in the sprawling sanctuary of Two Rivers Baptist Church in Nashville. Fear gripped me at the sound of the bodiless male voice that spoke so calmly, but with such unnerving authority, not at all how the movies had ever portrayed the voice of God. No thunder, no heavy reverb, but with an unmistakable finality that caused my heart to pound wildly and my resolve to crumble like a snowy peak breaking up before an avalanche. Near panic, I thought to bolt for the door, but even the slightest movement made me fear I would shatter into uncontrollable tears and humiliate myself irreversibly before so many strangers. My life had been out of control for so long, and I felt these do-gooders would not understand or care that I had lost all but the last bit of heart to live anymore. I could not have guessed what God was about to do that would change my life forever. The author of that book, of course, is Susan Meredith Beyer. Susan, tell us about how you mentioned here twice that God spoke to you audibly. Tell us about what was going on with you. Now, for years, I understand, and I need to tell the audience that for years, you had actually been a professional singer. The Lord gifted you with a great singing voice. Those are my words, great singing voice.
Thank you.
And you're too modest to ever say that. But for years, you had traveled with Whispering Bill Anderson, the country music star, all over the world, frankly. Mm-hmm. And at one time, you were even asked or thought that you were going to be his duet partner. But at any rate, you came to Nashville and brought your 3 children, and you wanted to become a professional singer. And you were, and a successful one. Mm. Well, what led you to this church and this particular night?
Well, when you're chasing after the world, and by the way, thank you, Chuck, for coming here. I was so excited to see you and Sue, your wife Sue. When you're chasing a rainbow in the world and you're trying to glorify yourself, sometimes that happens. Sometimes people become great stars, big stars.
Well, Susan, you were fairly successful. Why did you leave Whispering Bill Anderson's show?
Well, I was with him from, 78 to 1982. And I had been on the road myself for 6 years with my own show before I ever went with him. And it was a relief to go with somebody else's show and let them carry the responsibility for change, So I was with him 4 years. We did travel all over the world. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when I was hired to be with him, he knew I was a front performer. And as a matter of fact, Bill was a very good businessman, a very smart singer, who hired a lot of front singers to sing with him. So he sounded amazing, on the stage. And we all knew how to sing harmonies and blend. But we could front too. So he called me and asked me if I would be part of his show. So we did everything, including that soap opera, One Life to Live. We did about a year's worth of those, trying to recreate the Grand Ole Opry for the storyline of the One Life to Live soap opera, we called them. And we did a lot of traveling with that. We actually did some things on site out on Long Island, New York, and whatever, out of the ABC studios. But I had been with him for 4 years and traveled and traveled and traveled. I have those 3 children, those amazing 3 little people that I gave birth to when I was like 18, 20, and 22 years old. And I didn't have enough time with them. And I wanted to go home. I really wanted to be with my children. But I didn't know how to get off the road. You know, once you're out.
Well, it was your livelihood.
Well, it was. It's what paid the bills.
Sure.
It's why we always had a place to live and food to eat and all that, and a car. And they were proud of me, but at the same time they resented my music because it took me away from them.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of turmoil, too, you know, that they were trying to grow up, and I hadn't grown up, apparently. So anyway, I finally told Bill, I'm going home.
Now you moved to Nashville.
I moved to Nashville, yes, in 1977 with no money in my pocket and 3 little kids, and we lived in a motel
Oh, gosh.
for about 6 weeks before I found an apartment.
Well, how did you happen to wind up at Two Rivers Baptist Church in Nashville?
Well, that story, I went into some detail in the book because it's amazing how the Lord can bring you to things that you don't even know you want to go to.
Absolutely.
You know, I was living in this apartment, and I had been on the road with Bill, then did my own show for a couple of years, and the Lord did a wonderful thing. He ruptured a disc in my back.
Uh-oh.
Just to get my attention, I think, because I had been out there. I'd sometimes been getting standing ovations for things, and the next day I ruptured a disc just sneezing in a shower, and I ended up pulling my show off the road for 8 months, having to go through some surgery, and actually being very mad at God, very angry that you did this to me. If you even exist, show yourself. I'm sick of hearing about you. Whoa. And I was so arrogant and feisty, but I didn't know God really does exist. He is real. And the Bible, what the Bible says is true. But I didn't know anything about that. Mm-hmm. Well, when I was out on the road, I had started picking up Bibles. They always turned out to be the Gideon King James.
Yes, right up motel rooms.
Well, and you know, when you're in the world and you don't know how to read a Bible, you don't know that it's actually 66 letters or books. And it's not, you don't get the plot first and then read through. You know, there's a lot of plot in it. For me, I'd get to the begats and I would put it down.
Yeah, like most of them.
Say, what is begat?
Yeah, right.
But in the middle of the night, I would get crying, missing my children, wondering who I was and where my life was going, and why my family seemed to always be in such turmoil. And I'd put down the Bible and cry. Well, the PTL was on the air, and of course I would turn that on at 2 o'clock in the morning after I finished singing in these nightclubs. I'd turn that on sometimes because it was the only thing playing about that time of the morning. And I would look at them, and I was very critical, like a lot of worldly people. They looked at them, and I'd say, well, I like Jim Baker, okay, but his wife wears too much makeup. Well, here I was sitting with pounds of makeup. You know? Who's the hypocrite here?
Yeah.
Well, but their message sometimes made me cry, but I didn't know how I could appropriate that. How could I get that for me? And are they real? Is this real? Is God real? So,
did you really want to at that time, or did the want to really come later?
Well, no, the want to was creeping up on me, because what I started to do was I was, in the next morning, of course my band slept till about 1 in the afternoon, but I couldn't sleep past about 9 or 10 in the morning for some reason, even though I sang till sometimes 1 and 2. And I would start going to churches. Now, the only churches that really had their doors open were Catholic churches at that time. And I knew that. I knew they always had their doors open. But nobody's ever in them. You know, there was no priest. There was nobody in there. Which was good at the time. I think I would go in, I would sit down in a pew somewhere and look forward, and you'd see the crucifix, you know, at the end of the room in the sanctuary. And I would pray, God, make me better than I am. That's all I knew how to pray. I knew I was really out there. I mean,
Susan, at that point, had you accepted the fact that God was in fact real, or were you still doubting whether he was or not?
Well, I think I believed in God,
Okay.
but I didn't know how Jesus played
Okay.
into all that. And why would this man be picked to die for me?
Yes.
I mean, what kind of God is it that picks some poor slob
Yeah.
to go out and die for everybody in the world? Why didn't he do it himself? You know, of course, later.
He did.
Well, later I would understand that. But
Sure.
at that point, nobody had ever explained that to me, that God actually did that himself and that the blood that went down that cross was God's blood.
Absolutely.
My goodness, what a story. I can't wait for more. But first, can we talk? It's a God Thing is a nonprofit, listener-supported ministry based in Marietta, Georgia. We are not allowed to generate revenue by airing paid commercials, so all production and airtime fees, by far our biggest expenses, must be paid from tax-deductible contributions from listeners on participating stations, including this one. Here's our pitch, plain and simple. If you believe this ministry can be a tremendous influence on the lives of listeners, then we will truly appreciate your help, and frankly, without your help, we will not be able to stay on the air. So here goes. Will you personally support us with a financial contribution? Any amount will help. Times are tough, we know, but God promises a special blessing to those who cheerfully support His work. Giving to your local church first is a must, of course, but please consider us for an extra gift. You can financially support us in two ways. First, through our website, www.itsagodthingradio.com. Or you can snail mail a check or money order to It's a God Thing, 1919 Brown Ridge Drive, Northeast, Marietta, Georgia, 30062. That's 1919 Brown Ridge Drive, Northeast, Marietta, Georgia, 30062. Thank you so much for your help. Now let's get back to today's program.
So now you're in Nashville, and if I remember correctly, a former colleague of yours invited you to go to church, or said they were going to go to church. He wanted to talk to you about another job, another gig or something, and you agreed to meet him at church, and they came by and picked you up. Do I have that
Well,
right?
this was actually Bill Anderson's front man.
Oh,
He was such a comic. His name was Randy Bethune, and he's gone now to be with the Lord. But he was such a nutcase, and we had so much fun with him out on the road. And so when I got off the road, or off of Bill's show, and sat there this one morning in my apartment feeling very alone, and my daughter was so mad at me she wouldn't talk to me anymore, and she'd quit, go to school, and leave the house, and I'd sit there and wonder where my life had gone. I was 40 years old then, and I remember I looked across Briley Parkway here in town. If anybody knows Nashville, they know Briley Parkway is where the Grand Ole Opry sits. I lived on an apartment that backed up right to Briley, and I got up this one morning. My daughter was still sleeping, and I looked across, and there was this cross sticking up over the trees, big high steeple. God bless steeples. And it was sticking way up in the air. I thought, I'm going to go over and see where that is. Well, it's still quiet. It was like a Saturday morning. So I went around and drove across the freeway, and I finally found it. It was a little Methodist church, and but nobody was there. And I thought, well, I'll see when the Sunday services are. And so I looked on the thing, and it said like such and such in the morning. Well, I wasn't going to get up that early. You know. But I might go to the evening service.
Sure.
So I looked, and it said it had a 6 o'clock service. Well, I got myself all dressed up the next night, and I went over there, and I sat in the parking lot, and nobody ever came.
Oh, my goodness.
What I didn't know was that they had such a low attendance at their evening service on Sunday that they had stopped doing it for a while.
Oh, man.
So I sat there in the parking lot and cried that I don't even know how to go to church, and I guess you don't want me to go to church, and God doesn't love me, and I did all the pity party for a while. Then I went home, and I decided I'm never going to try to go to church again. Well, that week I get a call from Randy Bethune. And Randy said, I talked with him about some music, and I said, well, you can bring it over on Sunday morning. And he said, well, I can't because my wife and I are going to go to Two Rivers Baptist Church. And I instantly, I don't know, and I suppose the Lord put it in me, but I was instantly wanting to go to that church and really take God on. That was the way I felt about it. I was so angry that you're going to go to that church to be with the so-called God, if he even exists, I thought, and I want to go there too, and I want to make him show himself or get out of my life. Whoa. Forever. I never want to hear his name again. I still had not related anything to Jesus. Mm-hmm. It was all God. And when I went to the church and sat there in that sanctuary that day, I was very uncomfortable. For one thing, I didn't know how to be in church. And when you're sitting there and you've got a room full of nice, clean people that are holding hands, an old man had an arm around his older wife, children were sitting there drawing pictures and coloring little pictures of Jesus and whatever. The more I saw of this, the more I thought it was a big lie, and I wasn't included, that I was different. I felt very defensive that somehow I wasn't included in this party. They were having one, and I had been allowed through the door, but I thought, I don't believe this. I'm going to leave. Well, I started to get up to leave, and the guy on the platform said, everybody scoot in. He called it SOS, so everybody scoot in.
So you had to move to the middle of the pew then?
I had to move.
So you were trapped.
I was trapped.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, praise the Lord. He had me where he wanted me.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know what? Every time after that, when I tried to, I would think at a certain point, I was boiling inside and just railing. And the things I was saying in my heart, only a God could forgive. I'd been on the road 14 years, and he knew that I was a pretty rough little gal. And I sat there in my sparkly blue sweater and had gold threads in it and had too much makeup on. I was dressed for stage, looking good, good shape, in high heels up to 4 inches high. That was my best go-to-church stuff, Well, all of a sudden I felt small and not pretty and like I didn't belong, and I wanted to leave. But, even just turning my head slightly made me want to cry. Well, I was a pretty tough gal, always hiring men on the road, as musicians.
Sure.
And having to be the boss of the show. And I hadn't cried for like 2 years. I just wouldn't let myself cry. Nobody was going to hurt me. I was mother and father to my 3 children, long distance many times. And I was way out of whack, Chuck, I can tell you that. But sitting there, I realized how insignificant I really was in some ways. And I didn't know yet how really valuable I was to the Father. This always makes me cry because I can't forget his voice. I sat there in that pew and I looked around, and this little pastor, and I say little because he's about 5'6", he's 5'7", something like that, and a little bit stocky. And he came up on the platform, and he had on this outsized bow tie. To me, he looked like a clown. It looked like one of those great big ones. I expected to look down and see shoes about 2 feet long on his feet, and silly red hair and all this stuff. But what he had was he wore a full toupee. And I'm thinking, well, you look about like what I would have expected, I had all the world in me. But he had God in him. So he's up there trying to say anything into my and everybody's lives. And I looked at him and I went completely stone deaf. Just deaf as a post. And I got scared. I started to panic, and my heart started to beat, and I felt like you could see it through my sweater. Right. And I thought, oh my gosh, if there really is a God, he made me go deaf. So I was thinking to leave again. There was a big person on my left. To this day, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but the knees went clear to the pew in front. And then Randy's wife was sitting next to me, and she was just a little overweight. And Randy, who had a voice like a buzzsaw, was sitting on her right, and then there were 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
So I had a long way to go to get
Right,
to
to
the
get out
road,
of
to
there.
the aisle, you know. And in this deafness, it looked to me like this pastor just kind of faded off into the distance, and I hear 4 words. And it was just a man's voice, I'd say 30s. And he said, "You're going home, Susan."
You're going home, Susan.
He said my name.
Gosh, did that frighten you?
Oh, yeah, frightened.
Did it comfort you?
I was terrified. No, not
Okay.
at that moment. I was terrified. "You're going home, Susan." What it did was it made me want to cry. It broke through all my resolve, all my anger,
Oh, your toughness.
my toughness, and I sat there and I started to cry, and then I pulled myself back together, and about that time the sound came back in the room. Now, when I say the sound went away, there was the rustling of Bible papers, you know, people turning
Yes, right.
pages, and there was, I guess, the air conditioning and different sounds that you hear. I was stone deaf. I heard nothing but his voice, and it was right next to my ear, my right ear. And it was like somebody leaned over the back of the pew and whispered in my ear. Not whispered, talked. And I thought everybody around me should have heard it. And then I'm justifying, my heart is pounding, I'm justifying that, well, it was somebody behind me named
Yeah.
Susan that they were talking to. But you know what? Everything in me knew that was not true,
Oh.
that there was more going on here. Well, when the sound did come back, what I heard, the only thing I remember the pastor saying was, he was quoting in King James, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." But he went on and he said, "For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved."
And that made you feel free?
You know, it really made me cry more. I sat there and I felt so humble, but angry. I was confused. I didn't know what to do with all this. And I thought, I'm leaving here. I've got to get out of here. I have to get out. I felt like I was trapped in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he made me go deaf again to every other sound except his voice. And he said it again, only this time I couldn't tell if it was in my head or out of my head. But he said it with such authority. It's like all of a sudden it was such compassion, but such authority, such firmness, that I knew who was in charge
Sure.
here. And I didn't know what to do with it. I went just silent. In fact, I talk in the book about how on the way home, I don't know that I said anything. And it was only years later when I ran into Randy Bethune at a funeral home where we were both asked to sing for this particular funeral that I found out. He said, "Susan, you never explained what happened there." And I said, "Randy, I'm going to tell you a story." He said, "I know you came to Christ, but what happened?"
Oh, wow.
So I told him what happened, and he goes, "Golly!" You know, that's what he would always say that. And he said, "We had no idea what was going on." He said, "I saw you were in some kind of turmoil or something. You sat there and you'd cry, and then you'd not cry, and then you acted mad." And and he said, "I didn't know what to do or say." After I talked with him, I found out from him that he was not a believer. He and his wife had just been visiting that church themselves because they weren't connected to a church.
So the Lord used a not yet believer to witness
To take
you
me
and
to church.
take you there as a conduit?
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
They took me to
He
church.
is so awesome.
Isn't that amazing?
He is so
And
awesome.
then, after he hears my testimony a couple of years later, he goes and quits music business. Now, this was a man that was you talk about a man that wanted to be a picker and a grinner. He wanted to sing the rest of his life. He was going to be a star. Not anymore.
Oh,
He wanted
wow.
to live for the Lord. And he went to seminary and ended up, it's in the book, the story about Randy Bethune.
Well, Susan, speaking of the book, and we're just about out of time, but I want to say that Sue and I have really enjoyed reading this, and your conversion testimony and this beautiful story you have about the Lord speaking to you and bringing you home and telling you that he was going to bring you home.
Yes.
That's just a small part of what the amazing things that have happened to you ever since you accepted Christ. Mm-hmm. And with your career and with your marriage, and I'm going to tease the folks a little bit because I want them to buy your book, but I'm going to tease them because you later met a godly man, and he proposed to you in the very location where you heard that voice.
On that spot.
On that very spot.
Yeah.
That is absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
The book is called Above Reality, and it's by Susan Meredith Beyer. Now, where can a buyer buy the Beyer book?
Well, they can go to Amazon.com.
Okay.
And that's probably the best place to do
Amazon.com.
Uh-huh.
And it's Above Reality.
Above Reality. Mm-hmm.
The story of your spiritual life. And
Right.
Susan, I want to thank you so much for your willingness to share your story. So thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Wow, what a great half hour this has been. Tune in next time for more great God Thing stories, and tell all your friends to tune in too. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you or someone you know has a verifiable story which needs to be told, please email a brief summary to us at mystory@itsagodthingradio.com. That's my story, all one word, at itsagodthingradio.com. See you next time.